Hi. Karen and I both like to wear our hats. Just thought I'd let you know that. My name is Gordon Larin, and I'm the Executive Director for First Peoples Cultural Foundation. And I like to share that I'm of European settler heritage. I was born in the East. My parents are French-Canadian and English, Irish, and Scottish. And I use the pronouns he, him, and I also welcome the use of the pronouns they, them. And that's largely in solidarity with the LGBTQ plus community, which is a community I was born into, a beautiful global community. The foundation, First Peoples Cultural Foundation, is an Indigenous-led organization. We have a mandate to revitalize Indigenous language, arts, and culture and heritage. And I'm excited to share more about what we're doing at the foundation with you, but first I'll hand over the mic to my friend here, Karen. There.
Tansi, Tuao, Niwiwin Asuni Wasi School, Karen Aird, let's see soon Solo Trudit Ochinia. I said in Cree, good day, good afternoon, welcome everyone. My Cree name is Rocky Mountain Woman, and my English name is Karen Aird. I'm from Soto, BC, that's up near the Peace River in Treaty 8. My colleague Gordon and friend, colleague Gordon Larin and I are thrilled to be here in the traditional and ancestral lands of the Stolo Nation. I also want to acknowledge the knowledge keepers like Dina Jules and others that are here, and elders and caretakers, and all of you who have come from far away and taken time out of your busy schedules to be here. So thank you. Kinanes Kumten. We're going to be talking today about how our organizations, First Peoples Cultural Council, FPCC, and First Peoples Cultural Foundation, walk alongside our First Nation communities to support the safeguarding and caretaking and stewardship of our culture and heritage. But before we get into our organizations, I'm going to start with how I usually introduce myself. So a little bit about myself. So through my mother, Marlene Cameron Desjardins, I'm a member of Soto First Nations, as I mentioned. Here's a photo of my family. So up in the corner in the fancy red sweater is my kukum. She's Martha Desjardins. She was born en route. So a lot of our names are French, but we are not French. It was given to us by the Hudson's Bay Company and the Indian agents that came in. They also named a lot of the women with M's, so we have a lot of Marthas, Marys, Mariannes. So that's my great-grandma up in the corner, off to the left. And there's my cookum in the middle, Marianne, and she was 6 feet tall and had huge hands, and she was a mother of 11. My mom's the oldest. And then there's my mom in the middle in the red, that was 2 years ago when she was 81, and that's with 3 of her 6 sisters. And so my mom is 83 this year. And her first language was Cree, and so I'm fortunate to be able to start to learn it with her. And then off in the bottom is 4 of my 6 kids, and my daughter Annika is right there. Wave, Annika. So my kids through me are Soto and Gitsan, so their father's Gitsan, and then off to the side is me there with my dad, who's Scottish heritage, and 2 of my 4 brothers. So as you can see, we have a very big family. I'm also the niece of 15 aunts and uncles. I have 25 nieces and nephews. So that's just on my mom's side. So it's a blessing. And this is part of my heritage and where I come from, and I'm really proud of it. So for the past 27 years, maybe a little bit more, I've worked as an archaeologist and planner in heritage. I worked doing specific claims. I worked a lot with my communities in Treaty 8. I feel like it was really important to go back home and work. And when I was actually working as an archaeologist many years ago, back then nobody talked about Indigenous heritage. And really they didn't start talking about it till probably 5 or 6 years ago. It was still not part of a common sort of conversation in heritage. And so in 2012, I was presenting in Ottawa with the National Trust, which is a national organization for heritage. And I was talking for the first time about Indigenous culture and heritage. And I was with 2 other women. One was Métis, who's now a senator, and the other is Madeleine Redford, who was the mayor of Iqaluit. And the 3 of us, it was the first time in 2012 that the national organization talked about Indigenous people and heritage. That's not that long ago. So it's kind of crazy. And so I joined FPCC in 2018 in November. I should go back a little bit. So what came out of that presentation in that meeting was some seriously pissed off women. So we decided to form a national organization. So in 2012, and fortunately, Yvonne and Madeline were both lawyers, we started this national organization. We couldn't get anybody to meet with us. And we spent, I think, 4 years trying to get people to invite Indigenous people to conferences. That's all we wanted. Invite us, have us, give us our own space. So it took a lot of years, and it wasn't until we presented, Madeline and I, to the Senate, and they put in a report, you need to include Indigenous people as part of the work with heritage. So that was the sort of the start of a big change in the heritage world, and we're really fortunate. We're still struggling. The national organization, which I was part of, is still big and has a national board, but it's still done on the side of people's desks. There's no funding, and this is very common in Indigenous culture and heritage. So as I mentioned, I joined First Peoples Cultural Council in 2012. First Peoples Cultural Council is a Crown agency that was started over 31 years ago when Indigenous leaders came together. And actually, Dina's brother, Manny, was one of the first leaders that came together and helped start this organization. And so they were pretty frustrated. They wanted to make sure there was support for infrastructure, and there ended up being legislation formed, and that legislation really has been really crucial to our work. And I say that because I 100% believe that if we didn't have the legislation, we may not be here. So it's because of that they had to keep us as part of their work. We have a mandate, and we have also now a board. So we have a advisory board, which is the 34 language groups, but we also have a board of 11 experts, Indigenous experts, that advise us, right? So our work is really Indigenous-led, and we really focused for the first few years on the language work. So the language work was a big part of it, and we were able to get $50 million in 2018 and leverage that to really move on to do other work. And when I joined in late 2018, there wasn't a heritage program. There wasn't any funding. And so my first partner was the heritage branch, and Roger is back there, and he remembers that. And we were able to really become allies. We moved from this role that we always had as consultants to allies. And it was a major change in the dynamic, and from there, our friendship and our partnership has really grown, and I'm extremely thankful to the Heritage Branch for a lot of the funding we have now, because they have been strong advocates for that. So FBCC is really a unique model. There's nothing like it. I've looked, I don't see anything like it across Canada. It's a great organization. I could go on, but I'm going to talk more about Indigenous culture and heritage and some of the great projects that we fund. So what is Indigenous culture and heritage? It isn't just artifacts and archaeological sites. It differs greatly than settler heritage, which is usually built heritage or stories of arrival or settling. It's everything that defines us as Indigenous people. We see it as living. It's our values, our knowledge systems. It's our ancestors, our cultural treasures. These elements are all braided together and deeply connected to the land. In Indigenous languages, there is no definition of Indigenous culture and heritage because it is part of everything we do. It's our ideas, experiences, worldviews, objects, forms of expression like language, practices, knowledge, spirituality, kinship ties, places, and land, as I mentioned. Some of the examples are our stories, our oral histories, places, art, dances, ceremonies, laws and protocols, trails, monuments, and markers, structures such as shelters or dwellings, places of significance, for example, village sites, gathering places, seasonal round places, hunting blinds, places of transformation, transformer sites, places connected to ceremony or events. It's also objects or cultural treasures such as tools and artifacts and clothing and much more. It can be recordings, our treaties. That's part of our heritage. Our transcripts, our ancestral remains, the associated practices and protocols, harvesting knowledge, medicine plants, food practices, knowledge, So much more, and it's layered and it's all connected. So FPCC has been walking alongside our communities, as I mentioned, for 31 years with the language work, but we more recently have embarked on the Heritage Program. And our Heritage Program has really focused on advocacy, research, creating networking opportunities, and our grants. We have, when I first started, I had, I think, 12 grants I wanted, but it was kind of crazy. So we decided to just like narrow it down to 3 because we wanted to make the grants fairly open so our communities could, develop their projects according to sort of what their needs were. So our 3 main grants are a Graded Knowledge Grant, which is up to $25,000, and that's a grant program where somebody has to include language, arts, and heritage. And then we have the infrastructure grant as well as the heritage stewardship program. So those are our 3 main grants. We also funded quite a few pilot projects. And the pilot projects are a good indicator of the needs for funding. So we funded climate change and cultural heritage pilot projects. We funded some projects using AR and VR to document cultural places such as pictograph sites. And we also funded last year the Indigenous Museum Workers or Cousins program, and that was really exciting, as well as the place name projects, and we currently have 4 heritage planning projects underway. And we also have several research projects underway, but the one that we're dealing with right now the most, and we're really excited about, is the repatriation cost analysis. So we have a provincial-wide study being led by all Indigenous women and mostly from Haida Gwaii, and they're looking at the costs for our communities from different stages for repatriation. What is needed to support this over the long term? And we're also looking at a little bit at museums, but we don't have the capacity right now to do sort of a broader study. But we're talking to museums to understand their costs, because we realize that if we are able to get support and funding for our communities, we also probably have to look at museums so they have the capacity to participate in the repatriation process. So another thing we've been looking at is collecting baseline data, and that's understanding, particularly for climate change, understanding the impacts to many of our cultural sites so that we can support communities as they try to mitigate issues with climate change. And we're developing resources. If you go to our website, we have an amazing resource page. I don't know if you've checked it out, but we have a heritage stewardship toolkit, we have language toolkits, we have position papers, policy papers. So there's a lot of great material there that can support all of your work, not just for Indigenous communities as well. And our work is supported by an Indigenous Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee. And so you guys may have attended Angie Bain's presentation. She's one of the members for our committee, and they meet a few times a year and help provide advice on our work. So the demand for our grants far exceeds what we have for funding. And for example, for the first year that we had the infrastructure grant, we had over 100 applicants. We could only fund 11. And this year we had over 60. We're going to be able to fund 16. So the need is there, we know that. But we also are very thankful for our partners, such as the foundation, who has been advocating and taking over a lot of the work that we've had to do to advocate for this funding. One of the many projects we've been able to support through our funding, though, is Sekwa, which means the Rock House in Duniza. It used to be called Charlie Lake Cave Site, and it's over 12,000 years old in northeast BC, so it's about 2 hours from my community, north of my community. It's located close to the Alaska Highway and Charlie Lake, and you can see on the map where it's located, about 30 minutes from Fort St. John. So here's a picture of Dr. John Driver, who was part of the original excavations at Sekwa. So when I was a young archaeologist up in my communities, I heard so much about this Charlie Lake Cave site, but it was on private land and nobody could visit it. So our communities came together, 3 of our Duniza communities, and they purchased it in 2012. So we were able to start the process of reclaiming it, and it's now a National Historic Site. And it was interesting because when we first reclaimed it, I went down and met with Simon Fraser University and Dr. John Driver, who was, I think, the provost and vice president of that, at that time. And we had an uncomfortable meeting. We weren't friendly, I'll just say it. We were like, meh. And Barbara Winter was there, and she's also was at the museum at SFU. And so within about a year, and this is relationship building, we had renewed our relationship, and he came up and actually did tours of the site and talked to our communities, and now we have like a really incredible partnership, in particular with John and Barbara Winter. So I'm really thankful for that. So going back to the site, there's a bedrock. So about 12,000 years ago, I wouldn't even call it a cave, it's not very deep, but it's kind of a cave. This front parapet fell over, it crashed over, and that area, that platform there, is where all the excavations took place over 12,000 years. There's accumulation of debris. So here's some pictures of the early excavations, and I kind of consider this renegade archaeology. Those archaeologists out there know, like, WorkSafe BC would not like this. So what we see now is Sequoia after 12,000 years of history. It's older than the pyramids. When First Peoples first discovered Sequoia, it was a vertical standing stone, more than 6 meters or 20 feet tall, as high as a 2-story house. There were no trees, and you could see for many miles because below the Sequoia site is a glacial lake Peace. So it's really open, a very different landscape. So why is Sequoia so important? Scientists originally thought it was important because it showed prehistoric technologies, fluted points, which were 12,000 years old, as well as it was where 2 bison species came together from California and Alaska. But Indigenous people always knew it was a sacred site, in particular for the ravens found there. So why are the ravens important? There were 2 ravens found in the early layers of Sequoia. Understanding why and where they were buried is very complex. We've used archaeology, stratigraphy, indigenous knowledge, and other tools to evaluate it. But more recently, we're really looking now at oral traditions. And that really, there's still a lot of work to be done. So the site shows how the ravens, this is kind of cool. Okay. So this shows how the ravens were buried. Basically, these ravens were buried between 1,000 to 1,500 years apart in exactly the same locations. Fully intact ravens, like skeletons. And so that indicates that knowledge was transmitted over 1,000 years. It was a deliberate burial with generations of knowledge, with 2 complete skeletons of ravens buried in the exact same location. So why is the ravens burial at Sequoia so important? We don't know all the answers. Our communities are still exploring this. That's why the work in heritage is so important. Indigenous people haven't had the funding, we haven't had the resources to do this work. So more than ever, as our elders pass, we're seeing the need to start documenting those oral histories. But we know that ravens were messengers who carried messages between the under and upper world. They were associated with hunters and wars. They have many similarities to humans. They mate for life, they communicate verbally, eat meat, steal, scavenge, cache food, live in communities, give gifts, play, and are siblings to wolves. They're also a big part of our creation stories. So we don't know why they were buried there, but we suspect it was a really significant site because of the location. But it was probably associated with other rock art forms, which we haven't been able to identify. Perhaps there was the expansion of the forest. But as I mentioned, Indigenous people always knew it was a sacred site. This is not new to us, but we didn't have access to it till 2012. Oops. So now, Sequoia, now that it's being reclaimed, our communities have started the Sequoia Heritage Society, and First Peoples Cultural Council was able to provide the first funding for them. And everybody thinks, oh, it's a National Historic Site. They must have gotten funding. No, it's not that easy. So, they've been able to leverage that funding and now use it for place name projects. They have plans for developing a cultural center, and they also have been coming there regularly. It's part of Indigenous Days. It's part of school tours. They've opened it up to the community, and they're reclaiming the site. And I believe this is truly Indigenous heritage stewardship. This is truly in action what we want to see, is the reclaiming of these places and the ownership. Thank you.
Hi, I'm back. Thanks, Karen. I also want to just express my gratitude for being here on the lands of the Stolo people and the Hulkaminam-speaking people everywhere in these territories. Working at the foundation in an Indigenous-led way has been a gift to my life, and the learning and the unlearning has been remarkable. The work that I do often causes me to have a lot of introspection. And the foundation is very much in the heart space of the work as we start to reach out to people and to inspire folks to join the discussion and become involved. And, as we think about decolonization, sometimes I think that when we talk about it, it brings up frustration in people. And I really hope to shift this, this feeling, because for me, it really brings up a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration for change. Like, I think that's the topic that we're here to discuss is, brave change forward. And when I think of the topic of our presentation today, like, how do we move forward together in a good way with culture and heritage? Early in my work, one of the personal practices that I do is I just pick and I think you're all pretty much history buffs or historians or people who enjoy thinking about the past. But I sit with myself and I think back, pick a time, 500 years ago, 300 years ago. And I close my eyes and I think about the land. And I think about pre-contact. And about what was here and what is here still. And when I kind of emerge from that, and I invite you to do that at some point, if you don't already do it, and maybe this is something folks do. But when I do that, I start to see things through another lens. I see the land in a different way. And I see the people who I stand beside more fully. Somebody who I work with, who I care about very much, said to me, Indigenous people see oppression everywhere. And that really struck me. And so when I think about the land, I start to think about reality and what's real, because we're in this time where we're talking about fake news and there's AI is making virtual realities happen and things are a little bit confusing. And I guess we have more questions than we have answers at this time. But I can tell you now that what you're looking at right here is reality. This is the truth. These are the Indigenous territories and the 34 language groups, the 90 dialects, and the people on the land. And anything else is a rival. So I sort of invite you to peel up the colonial construct that's imprinted on our minds and sort of invite this in, because there's a beautiful, luminous land of culture and vibrancy, brilliance, incredible Indigenous knowledge to be shared. And this is very generous of Indigenous people to make this step, this brave step, after so much history, and to put this forward. It's my first slide. I'll try and go a little faster. So First Peoples Cultural Council and First Peoples Cultural Foundation have worked together to co-create a map that brings together languages, arts, and heritage. And really, in these territories here, of what is colonially known as British Columbia, this is the first time that Indigenous people are expressing and sharing the reality of the land in a way that we can all enjoy it and celebrate it and learn from it and respect it and honor it. So it's a real-life experience. It's a map intended for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So I encourage you to engage with it. And there's going to be another presentation tomorrow, so this is just an appetizer. Gretchen is going to be giving you a presentation, I think, in the afternoon at some point. Is that right? No other map weaves together Indigenous languages, arts, or cultural heritage information in one space. There's a heritage program called Braided Knowledge. And it's just this concept that's really just speaking from, again, the place of truth, where these things don't really exist in isolation, but we tend to apportion them out so that we can seek funding or explain things away. So this is a wonderful place to sort of come and braid it all back together again. There's languages, artists are expressing themselves from all the different territories they elect or volunteer to engage with, so you can find out who's out there and what their creative natures are all about. And also learn a lot about various heritage points of interest. And in the language, there's also an engagement called First Voices at First Peoples Cultural Council and the Foundation, which tie into the map. And they all team up. So it's a really brilliant collaborative effort. So the platform's community-driven. Artists are working across all disciplines and honoring their practices in their communities and doing that work. The map provides online environment for Indigenous artists and artist groups, so it's also an opportunity for people to sort of cultivate economy and improve access to selling their art forms or sharing their talents. So this is one QR code you don't want to miss. Sorry. I invite you to pop out your phone if you want to, or you can check it out later at the next presentation. But this QR code will take you right to the map on your phone. I also really enjoy looking at it on a desktop because I find while the app is remarkable and capable of so much, my fingers are really clumsy, and when I get on a desktop, I can really relax into it. So I invite you to do that too. So that's just one really cool thing I get to tell you about. Now the other one is this endowment, First Peoples Cultural Heritage Fund. And I really want to acknowledge Karen Aird and the folks at the Heritage Branch and MER and British Columbia's Ministry of Municipalities, everyone who chipped in to make this endowment a reality. It's part of BC's 150 celebration, and it was a $5 million endowment to the foundation. Really what this does is it makes sure that the foundation will never go away. So it keeps the lights on forever, which is great because it's $5 million in perpetuity. And it's meaningful. There's a lot of words up here, but this is essentially a quote from Minister Rankin, and it comes from the actual letter that created the endowment. And I guess I'm sharing it because I find the language interesting, Like I think about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we might have all celebrated BC 150 and not even talked about time immemorial. A lot has changed in a very short period of time. So change is afoot, and good discussions are happening. I'm grateful for the movement of truth and reconciliation. I also think that another word that we can weave into this conversation is reciprocity. I shared earlier that my family is French. My family's been on the land since the 1630s. My heritage and my ancestors are the entire colonial story on the land. And I reflect on that. And I don't just say that, I reflect on it. And it impacts how I move in my life and how I share this work. And I'm seeing it weaving into things. Like the way this statement is worded is slightly different than the way it might have been said 10 years ago. And so I'm really impressed by that, but I also know that we have a long way to go. So it's a historic first. And another thing that I've been doing, in working in philanthropy is learning about endowments. And I learned that universities have thousands of them. And the Vancouver Foundation, the Victoria Foundation, the Toronto Foundation, these large community foundations have billions of dollars and thousands of endowments. Well, I'm really happy to announce that we've received the first endowment to an Indigenous-led organization of $5 million. And I'm hoping that will incentivize people to contribute more and to spread the word and to sort of shift the way in which philanthropy is thinking. We're thinking more about Indigenous self-determination and respecting Indigenous sovereignty and funding in a way that's more sharing and more generous. And I see that starting to happen too. And I'm really grateful for it. And so on June 21st, our first ad campaign in Vancouver will be in bus shelters and digital posters, and I'm kind of excited about that too. You'll see us encouraging people just to celebrate Indigenous cultural vitality on June 21st. And so that's all I have to share. Thank you.
I'll just say that the last conference I was at, the mic stopped working the minute I went up there, so I apologize. I feel like this is my fault. So, yeah.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Holly Janzen. I'm the program coordinator for the UFV Peace and Reconciliation Center. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a young 25-year-old white woman.
And my name is Jackie Drummond. My pronouns are she, her, hers. A visual description of me. I'm wearing a navy suit. I have brown hair, and I'm wearing tortoiseshell glasses, and I'm white. And I work for Dr. Carlson as his research coordinator, and Dr. Carlson is also the director of the Peace and Reconciliation Center.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. The curse.
Okay. So switch it. So the UFV Peace and Reconciliation Center, also known as PARC, is the first of its kind among British Columbia's post-secondary institutions. Launched in September 2020, PARC recognizes that there are diverse pathways to peace building and reconciliation, and for that reason we have intentionally chosen to define these terms broadly. We want people to come to us with their definitions and their priorities so we can work with them to advance their goals in the way that works best for them and for society as a whole. Through PARC, we focus on enlarging our understanding of the roots of conflict, developing creative approaches to reconciliation, and promoting engagement aimed at transforming conflict into peace and building capacity and sustainability where injustice and tension have resulted in harm and marginalization. PARC's vision is to be a safe, supportive, and peaceful place to promote dialogue, research, scholarly and artistic work for faculty, students, and community to approach differences, conflicts, activism, and the challenges of life in a way that works for the good of the individual, the community, and the world we live in. Our mission is to envision and facilitate constructive and innovative processes that promote healthy relationships, transform conflict, and build just communities. PARC aims to achieve this by collaborating with stakeholders to conduct research that facilitates constructive dialogue, that supports conflict transformation and reconciliation. PARC is linked to many academic programs, including peace and conflict studies, Indigenous studies, history, global development studies, criminology, and social work, in ways that support the center's outreach and educational goals. So we have 4 values that we aim to achieve through all our work at the Peace and Reconciliation Center, the first being attitudes and culture. Our center's work aims to foster service where there is apathy, respect where there is discrimination, responsibility where there is blame, integrity where there is dishonesty, empathy where there is hubris, restoration where there is punishment, and courage where there is timidity.
And our second value is listening and dialogue. So this is all about creating, facilitating, and supporting conversations and creating a place where those can happen. And it's also about listening to understand, and to hear and to acknowledge the emotions and effects that are related to conflict. And we want to facilitate dialogue in a way where everyone can share what the story means to them in the past, the present, and the future. And then from those conversations, our goal is to move forward in a constructive way that builds peace.
And our third value is transformation. So with this, we aim to cooperatively work out a way to act justly, to deal with the past, and create positive, healthy ways to move forward together. We actively promote and support restorative models and methods of justice and reconciliation, and we aim to equip citizens of all ages with a restorative frame of reference and the skills to use conflict to transform our culture to healthier relationships.
And then our fourth value is restoration and new beginnings. So this is all about taking the conversations and the learning that we do together, and then using that to strengthen the community and put it into action. So we do this through education, mediation, relationship building, and advocacy to change and transform systems, as well as policies and laws. So now we're going to go on to how these values are being implemented into our work.
Okay, so one of our initiatives is the Collaboratorium. Launched in 2021, the Park Collaboratorium is a student internship program designed to provide community organizations with sophisticated research. Thank you. Sophisticated research services at a fraction of the cost that would be associated with a corporate consultant, while providing students with opportunities to deploy and enhance the research skills that they have been developing in their classes. The Collaboratorium is unique in the sense that it allows communities who may not otherwise have the capacity to do so to identify and direct the research project that holds the most importance to them. The research carried out through the Collaboratorium seeks to build a foundation for making the world a genuinely better place in which the communities are better able to tell their story, achieve their goals, and meet their members' needs. The Collaboratorium aims to bridge both the expectation and skills gap by providing training, intercultural awareness, and administrative and academic oversight for passionate undergraduate students and community partners to conduct research that contributes to building a foundation for peace and reconciliation. There is mutual opportunity and benefit for both community partners and the student research interns who participate in the Collaboratorium. For community partners, they have the opportunity to undertake projects that they might not otherwise have the capacity for. And for students, they have the opportunity to gain meaningful work experience and connect with professionals in their field prior to graduating and entering the workforce.
So I wanted to share one of our past projects. So the Collaboratorium started 2 years ago. So this was a project that was part of that. And this is it in the very early stages, but what it is a Shakespeare reconciliation garden at the UFV campus in Chilliwack. And so we had Collaboratorium students that were a part of this project. And just a quick summary of what a Shakespeare garden is. It's a garden that includes some or all of the plants that are discussed in Shakespeare's plays. And so we had the idea to put a garden together that brought those Western plants together with the indigenous plants that grow here locally. And there's a great article on the UFE Today blog written by Gerald Narciso. And so he goes into detail about what this garden is. And so we had 2 students working with Dr. Melissa Walter, who's an English professor at UFE. And so those students, her and her team, they organized and planted the garden. And I'll show you what that looks like now. So I went out and I took these pictures yesterday. So it still has a little bit of work to go, but it's mostly complete now. So the garden features indigenous plants, as well as those from around the world, which can be seen growing together on Stalo-Temek, right outside of Building A on the Chilliwack campus. And in the future, there's a plan for plant identification signs to be placed, and these will be available in English, Halkomelem, where it's available, and then as well as the Latin names of these plants. And then when the residential school, the Unmarked Graves in Kamloops, was made public, Dr. Jacqueline Nolt, the Dean of the College of Arts, had the idea that we plant 215 of the same plant in our garden to commemorate those lives. And so Brian Minter, the former UFE Chancellor, shared with the team that the Indigenous community was suggesting that these be orange flowers. So those aren't pictured, but they bloom later in the year. And this garden opened on July 16th of 2021. There was close to 70 people there to gather and celebrate, and it was opened with Indigenous drumming and song, and then there was a tour of the garden, and then some speeches about reconciliation and the history of Shakespeare Gardens as a whole. And so this is our this year's Collaboratorium group. So at the beginning of May is when all of our students started. And so we went on a land-based learning tour around Stalo territory. So here they are with Dr. Carlson in the beige sweatshirt. And so we are at Lady Franklin Rock. So this is a site where there are transformer stories associated with this place. So, and then along on the tour, we stopped at some places with colonial relevance as well, because the Fraser Canyon was a place where the gold rush took place, and there was a huge influx of miners who came and completely changed the landscape and the culture of the area.
So now we'll go through some of the projects that students are working on this year and the different partnerships. The first is a partnership with the Fraser Basin Council, which is a nonprofit society that brings people together to advance sustainability in the Fraser Basin and across British Columbia. The students working with the Fraser Basin Council will be assisting with their Revitalizing UNDRIP initiative. UNDRIP stands for the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, an initiative that educates and inspires non-Indigenous people working in government and in the private and not-for-profit sectors to work together in a good way with Indigenous peoples, organizations, and communities. The students will be identifying commonalities and best practices through an analysis of success stories between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, communities, and organizations. Working with the Revitalizing UNDRIP program lead, the summer student intern will finalize a research methodology to carry out a trends analysis on the initiative's Story Hub. Another partnership is with Seabird Island First Nation. And for this project, students from the UFE's Teacher Education Program are working under the supervision of Dr. Keith Carlson and with mentorship from Seabird Island educators and knowledge keepers, as well as faculty in the UFE's Education Department, to create curriculum resources, including lesson plans, teachers' guides, and learning tools that can be used by teachers in the Seabird Island schools and within schools in the Fraser Cascade School District. Dr. Carlson has been working with the Seabird Island First Nation conducting research that documents key elements of the community's cultural, social, and economic history, and that describes the relationship between Seabird Island community members and their traditional territory. These resources will be designed to be in compliance with all the provincial curricular guidelines and so easily adoptable by teachers, and the curriculum resources will target Seabird learners at all levels from the K-12 system.
And our next project that we have students working on is the Unmarked Graves project. This is in collaboration with the Stalo Research and Resource Management Center. So they have a team going through records as well, and our task for our Collaboratorium students is to go through the Indian Agent letter books that were kept for the Lytton and New Westminster agencies for these 4 schools. So on the top left is All Hallows, which was in Yale. Top right would be St. George's in Lytton, and then we have Kokolitsa, which was it's in this area, it's in Chilliwack, and then St. Mary's is here on the bottom right. So these are the 4 schools we're looking at, as well as the day schools in the area. And so we have students going through records, and all of this will be compiled into a report that will be shared with Indigenous people and their communities.
Another partnership is with Matsqui First Nation. For this project, students are pulling together and processing materials into an organized form that will be searchable and accessible to the Matsqui leadership and community. Many of these materials are from technical reports that Dr. Carlson has written for Matsqui First Nation. Other materials come from various forms of data, maps, archival information, and historical information. Students are digitizing materials that have not yet been digitized, and all materials will be indexed and cataloged so as to be searchable and usable. This content will all be put into a database that will be accessible to the community and will inform a community history book that is being written by Dr. Keith Carlson in partnership with the Matsqui First Nation.
Did you skip? Oh, okay, we don't have a picture of it, but Dr. Carlson is also, he does several presentations in the area and abroad, and he's created a lot of resources as well that cover a lot of these histories and topics, and he also shares the impacts of settler colonialism. So he just finished doing a series for the Abbotsford School District administrators. So our hope is to take all of these presentations he's done, as well as the resources he's created, and turn it into a short book that can be given to educators, and other people are welcome to use it as well, but just as a clear, concise package that kind of brings all of his research together.
Another partnership is with Alongside Research and Consulting, which is a consultancy firm working alongside local Indigenous communities to develop education resources. Alongside is developing and delivering a course that aims to support the revitalization of cultural identity amongst Stalo youth through teaching and learning about respectful land and resource use, land stewardship and governance. The student intern working on this project will be involved in the delivery of this course by serving as assistant to the Alongside team as they set up and deliver each of the course components. The student will be involved in everything from providing transportation to elders to helping supervise Stalo youth, and they will be involved in conducting background research on specific curricular subjects that they will be providing. They will also be provided with opportunities to assist in video and audio recordings of aspects of the course.
And our next project is a research project that Dr. Carlson is leading, along with Dr. John Lutz, who is a professor at UVic. And I hold this project near and dear to my heart because it's the project that I started working on when I joined the Collaboratorium 2 years ago, and that has led me to this point. And so essentially what this project is studying the smallpox epidemics that swept through Stalo territory as well as neighboring areas. So one of the main ones was in 1782, and then there was one in 1862 when the gold rush happened in the canyon. And within 4 months there was 30,000 American miners who entered Stalo territory. And so it just created a breeding ground for smallpox. And so there's a lot of research that's already been done on these epidemics, but a lot of it comes from a colonial perspective and it focuses a lot just on the numbers. And so what we're interested in finding out is how it impacted Indigenous people, not just physically, but how it changed their landscape and their tribal territories, and how they began to interact with one another, as well as how it changed cultural practices and the trauma that they're still experiencing today as a result. So we have students who are going through resources that we find in archives. That's where this came from. It's a newspaper that talks about, it's on the island, the smallpox epidemic. So it's kind of cool that we find these resources, and our students it's very interesting for them going through all these things and finding things that are useful for the project.
Another partnership is with the Hope and District Arts Council, which is an arts and cultural nonprofit society that works to provide affordable, accessible arts and cultural programming to their community and surrounding area. So the student working with the Hope and District Arts Council will be undertaking a cultural inventory and mapping of the arts and cultural assets in the region. The This inventory will include the communities they serve from Hope up the Fraser Canyon, including Yale, Boston Bar, Dogwood, and the Sunshine Valley. Our next partnership is with CEDAR. CEDAR is an CEDAR Outreach Society of BC provides resources for people struggling with substance use needs, living unsheltered, facing barriers to employment, or coming into conflict with the law for poverty-related issues. CEDAR is a standalone nonprofit organization that works in close partnership with the Abbotsford Police Department and bylaws, and the student working on this project will be picking up a project that is researching relations between policing and people experiencing homelessness. In particular, the student will be researching various outreach models that exist and have been implemented in other cities with the goal of implementing a successful outreach program for people experiencing homelessness in Abbotsford, BC.
So that kind of sums up our Collaboratorium and what we're busy doing at the moment with our students. Another initiative that Park offers is our Peace Talk series, which is available to the public. We have events that happen every few months, usually. So I just wanted to give a few examples. So the first one here was about renaming and destatuing, challenging history in the age of reconciliation building. So we had a panel of scholars who discussed the history of this and also the challenges that we face presently, and then what should be done with monuments and places that are named after people who perhaps we shouldn't be commemorating. And yeah, so the point of the talk was just to have a conversation of how we can do this in a way that's reconciliatory, and it's the point would not be to try and erase history or to hide it from public view. And then our second one was about genocides across time and space. And so our panelists, they examined genocides that have happened over time and looking at what made them all distinct, but then also what made them all tragically similar. So some of the genocides that were covered were the Holocaust, the Stalinist purges, the Rwandan genocide, and then Keith was there as well. He talked about the Californian massacres of Indigenous people. And so the important thing that came from this conversation was that we need to understand how people have justified such atrocities so that we make sure that we can prevent their reoccurrence. And then the final one here just happened last week. And so Stalo Elder Larry Commodore, as well as his good friend Hannah Kawaz, they came and shared their experience standing in solidarity with Palestinians. And Larry was on a boat to stand in solidarity and was captured by the Israeli police and put in prison for it. So it was very interesting to hear his perspective, and there was a really great conversation that came out of that.
The last initiative we'll talk about today is the Hualitum Siaya Allyship and Reconciliation Building Program. Hualitum means a hunger that cannot be satisfied. So when colonial settlers came to this land, the local Indigenous people referred to them as Hualitums. And Siaya means friend. The development of Hualitum Siaya Allyship and Reconciliation Building started as a Collaboratorium project. The Collaboratorium students who carried out the initial work of developing this program first worked to develop an understanding of the current landscape around allyship and reconciliation programs being offered in Canada. After strengthening this understanding and connecting with representatives from various organizations offering these programs, the students developed an outline model of the Hualitum Siaya Allyship and Reconciliation Building Program. In preparing for their final recommendations, 23 people were consulted to gather a series of recommendations regarding what the Hualitum Siaya program should look like and how it should be carried out. Of these people, 10 were Indigenous faculty members, 7 were Indigenous workshop facilitators, 3 were directors of Indigenous organizations, 1 was an elder, 1 was an Indigenous curriculum specialist, and 1 was a Stalo member. With this initial research complete, Park Director Dr. Keith Carlson was then able to further consult with local Indigenous communities and individuals to prepare for the implementation of this program. through collaboration and partnership with the Stalo Nation, the Stalo Tribal Council, the Stalo Research and Resource Management Center, and the Stalo Grand Chiefs Council, we were able to successfully launch this program this past February 2023. This program seeks to help build people's capacity for reconciliation building by teaching the importance of authentic allyship and providing skills for building relationships between colonial settlers and Indigenous communities here in the Fraser Valley and beyond. There are currently 106 people undertaking this program, which is 1 year in length and consists of a mixture of presentations, workshops, and hands-on land-based learning opportunities, where participants will be guided in developing the knowledge and empathy necessary for becoming effective and respectful allies to local Indigenous communities. On the slide, you will see 2 cedar bracelets. Participants made these bracelets at the beginning of the program at a cedar weaving workshop led by Gracie Kelly. Participants wear these bracelets as a symbol of their commitment to continuously learning how to be effective and respectful allies. This program is designed in response to the many inquiries we receive from settlers who want to learn more about the Stalo people and to develop competencies in allyship. But even more, it is in response to requests from Stalo leaders and educators who have indicated that their primary focus needs to be on providing programs and capacity building opportunities to their own community members. In launching this program, we are therefore collaborating with Stalo leaders in a way that helps lay the foundations for genuine reconciliation while alleviating Indigenous people of the weight of having to organize and deliver such programs themselves. After completing the program, people will have developed a deeper understanding of what it means to be an ally and how to embrace the goal of being in a constant state of learning and unlearning, relationship building, and transformative action. And these are 2 of the sessions that we did with the allyship program. So on your left, that is a naming ceremony that we had at the Coquilitza Longhouse. And then this is a picture of Carol Peters leading us on a traditional plant walk where we learned about the medicinal properties of different plants native to this land.
So we're at the end here, and I meant to give a territorial acknowledgement at the beginning. Of course, we're on Stalo-Tumuk. Specifically today, we're on the land of the Chilkoyak tribes. So we want to acknowledge that, and through all of these initiatives, Park is committing itself to moving together in a good way with the Indigenous communities here. And there's a quote from Herb Joe Tikuwatsa, who's a member of the Chacton First Nation, that I like to remember. And he just says that there's no right way to do it, there's only a good way to do it. And so that's really what we seek to do at Park, is to come together and find a good way to walk together with Indigenous communities, and to make sure that's done in a good way. Yeah, I think that's everything. We have all our contact info here if you're wanting more information, or if you'd like to reach out.
The students in the Collaboratorium. So they're mainly social science students coming from a lot of history students. There's some global development, social work, political science, psychology, sociology, Indigenous studies.
Yep.
And with the projects that they do with us, they've been doing a lot of transcription work. They do environmental scans of different for different projects that they're doing. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we have them doing archival research as well. So there's things that Keith and I have collected over the past year and a bit that they're going through, and then there's opportunities perhaps later in the summer to go and visit some of these places to gather more material. Yeah, there's a lot of data analysis, working with databases, inputting information. And they all went through 2 weeks of training where we had several workshops with different faculty members at the university as well as community members, because they all bring very distinct skills that come with the degree that they're pursuing. which is great because they all work together really well. They kind of fill in the gaps of each other's strengths and weaknesses. And then with the 2 weeks of training, they gain the foundation of how to do research and in the way that Park does research. Yeah.
Karen, I have a question for you. You know, I think you're the second time I've seen the Raven story, and it just reminds me that there's so much of that type of real personal story keeping that how do we, an organization like Heritage BC, what is the advantage and how are ways that we can walk alongside your organization to get those stories out beyond just sharing it on socials or beyond, that's easy. Do you have thoughts on that? And
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we have as an organization is that even though we have funding until 2025, we don't have funding after that. So my heritage program could potentially dissolve. And it's always been like that. We're lucky to have these 3 years of funding. But once we lose that, like the infrastructure program, the stewardship, all of those things will be gone. So I think the biggest for us, the support which we need is advocacy. And we get really quite tired of it. And I was so thankful the foundation has come in and be able to do some of that. But we've been meeting with people forever since I joined. We spend a lot of our time talking to people trying to get long-term sustainable funding. And that's what our need is immediate. Ultimately, we're looking at different ways that we can partner, but we're a small team. Like I have 3 staff, and then I have Gretchen who works with us quite closely, and others as well. And but we don't have the capacity necessarily to do the work that is needed. So we're really looking at programs like this one and others that maybe, and even with Heritage BC, that we could maybe look at developing internship opportunities or partnerships like that, working directly with our communities, right? So that's something that we're thinking of in the next couple of years for sure. So yeah, it's on the works. So that's where you could definitely help out. So I was curious, I just had a question for you two. Is there potential for this program to expand to other universities like TRU or Northern Lights College?
I mean, I don't see why not right now, because Dr. Keith Carlson, he actually originally, what was the university? USASC is where it was originally implemented. Oh, okay. And it existed there for various years. And then he moved to the University of the Fraser Valley, so it's implemented here now. But it's our second year doing it now, but to expand to other universities, I think would definitely be a long-term goal of ours.
To follow what you were just saying, Karen, what would meaningful advocacy look like from heritage organizations that are settler-led? What could we do that would be the most advantageous?
Yeah, I think for us, when you have the ear of the gatekeeper, we all know who those people are in government, right? Like, for instance, ministers or directors, like, write letters, send, say we have to keep supporting this organization and the work. The funding is really critical. We've been saying that ourselves, but it's also, it needs to be continuously said, right? Because 2025 is coming quickly. And I know that, once we lose this funding, we're going to lose a lot of really important programs happening. And some of them are just starting. Like, we've funded already over 260 projects in just basically 3.5 years, really, since we've had that, and almost 17 million has gone out the door. So that's an incredible project. And right now we actually are finishing our peer review, so we're going to have quite a few more projects being funded, peer reviews. But can you imagine, like, if we had this funding for the last 40, 30 years, what could have happened, right? But it's just right now that it's starting. And I also really believe our communities need the funding directly themselves. There's no reason why we can't have both. right? So I know that government sometimes does say that, well, we're funding this program, so we don't need to fund that. No, the need is extensive. Like the resources need to be put towards us, and it shouldn't be piecemealed, right? So yeah, advocacy, letters, talking to ministers, talking to people that, and just, constantly, like, I guess probably keeping our networking and our conversations going as well is really important, yeah.
And just a secondary question to that, how would outside organizations obtain permission to share information from your own resources, your own research, your own websites? I wouldn't want to just copy and paste things onto our own website. How would we go about obtaining permission for appropriate use of your documentation?
Right. I mean, if you're copying, say if you're using one of our policy papers or information like that, just reference us in your notes. Like, that's fine. I'm happy that it's being shared. The more it's shared, the better, right? So just reference it, or just mention that it's come from First Peoples Cultural Council. That's really all we expect. Yeah. No, but thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, Rebecca. Hey.
I was just going to say, Karen, it would be a good time to plug the foundation a little bit. I think that's another way people can support the work that we do.
Good reminder, thank you. Gordon's gone, so I forgot. He just left a few minutes ago. Yeah, so our foundation, it's been around for 21 years. So it's been around for a while, but it really just took off in the last few years when we got the endowment that Gordon talked about. The endowment, or the foundation, has the ability to basically house that funding. So supporting us by pushing for people to donate to the foundation is really important. And the foundation has been lovely because what we deal with at the council is this fiscal year end that everybody knows about, right? And so funding through the foundation, we're able to extend or provide longer timelines for like huge projects like infrastructure projects. So the foundation, I encourage you to, if you know of people that are interested in donating or supporting the foundation, really just reach out and share that information, yeah. Yeah, Rebecca was our first donation, private. Thank you, Rebecca.